Hi, and good evening, everyone, and welcome to Living Man at Church and with our special edition, Thursday edition with the one and only Dr. Condit is with us tonight for science, philosophy, and metaphysics. So as you are coming into the room, please make sure you come in the live, share this link because tonight you are not going to want to miss this presentation. We thank you guys so much for joining us. This is week three, going on four, I believe, of this incredible installment in building our faith. And for those of you who have gained faith through these series so far, we are just so excited about the continuation of the journey. So at this time, we want to make sure that you once again like and share this page. Like and share our ministries. We got so much coming up for you guys. Even next week, we believe we have a health segment that's coming up next week, and we are so excited about that. And Pastor Myers and Atante will be sharing more about that this coming weekend, this coming Sabbath. So at this time, we are going to introduce our illustrious host, Dr. Todd.
Hello, and welcome again for our third session together. If you've been there before, welcome again. And if this is the first time you are joining us, well, welcome for the first time. We will do a review, so you will catch up in just a moment. So, without any other comments, let's start on the frameworks. There we go. So, our Thursday session today under science, philosophy, and metaphysics, we are doing the Pan process, and we are doing the third column, which is the arguments for theism. That means the arguments which says that there is, or points to the claim that there is a God in existence. But before we do that, let's do a little review. In the session one, we said we were going to do science and philosophy and address metaphysical questions. What's metaphysics? That is with beyond the physical dimensions of our existence. We said we wanted to do neutral inquiry. Neutral means you look at both the theories. If there are two that are in contention, that we look at both. And to do that in an unbiased way, we need four factors. The four factors are humility, honesty, calmness, and respect. And with these, we will do a search, we said. And the search should be not only neutral and unbiased, but it should be shown. And we did that by starting on what we call the Pan process. The Pan process looks at both sides of the argument, a pro and a con for each of the theories that are in contention. So we want to play it fair. Column one, we saw on the first day arguments for atheism, arguments for the claim that God does not exist. And we found there were none, no arguments there. Why? Because atheism can be proven only if you disprove theism. So the disproof is actually column two. So there's nothing there in column one. The other way is, if you want to say something is absent, then you must look at all the possibilities of the presence, and each of those possibilities must be looked at and examined and set aside. But we said we cannot do that because the universe is too big, for example. So, no arguments in that column. Then last week we saw column number two, arguments against the claim that God exists. And we found there were six of them. We looked at all six, but all six broke down. None of them were successful in taking away or discarding the concept of God. All broke down. And sometimes, I heard people say, hey, this is heavy stuff. Well, two comments on that. Number one, I empathize. Yes, it is heavy. In fact, I do present a lot of information. So don't swallow everything at one point. You will get what I call information indigestion. You swallow and then can't digest. So the best thing is to pick one or two. If I bring 5 or 6 or 10 points, don't swallow all 10, just one or two, and start mulling over them and thinking over them. Then it will make sense. For example, last week we saw 6 points. Hey, you don't have to understand all six. What you can say is, we did all six and none of them stood. That's good enough to start off with. Because we did go through all the six. I don't remember all the details of each of the six arguments, but I do know we went through all of them and none of them really stood. That itself is a good takeaway. And then from there, you can say, well, by the way, do remember one of the points. So you can say, for example, this one from the base statement in which we were saying six were looked at, none of them stood. For example, one. So that's the way we do it. Later on, when you really got that one nicely, neatly put into your pocket, then you'll go to the second one. And that's the way we build it up. The second reason why it's heavy stuff, it's because we do not think and talk in this wavelength, my friends. Very few people talk like this. So it's like a new language, and a new language takes time to learn. So when you start learning a new language, every word is with little plodding, one word and then the next, and you don't know whether the next should be spoken this way or the grammar should go that way. So we're learning a new language. It will take time. So it is heavy stuff. I do empathize. Uh, and we also said last week that the atheists, they usually go for emotional factors, not intellectual factors, to make their decision. Well, we are neutral inquirers, so we should be fair. So we should look at the other side too. And when we look at the other side, the believers also are based on emotional factors. So the disbelievers are blind, but so are the believers. And when you have both of them blind and trying to discuss a controversial topic, then it usually lands up in actual chaos and confusion. That is why you have it all over the world right now, chaos and confusion, because both the sides are blind, the believing and the disbelieving. What we are trying to say now is we should remove our blindness, and that is the part that we are going to do with the pan process. We look at both sides so we become informed, so we can make an intelligent decision at the end. Look at both sides and weigh the evidence. So, what we are trying to do is look at information that we think is credible. So, let's get on with the third session that we have for today, and that is Pan process, column number 3, arguments for theism, for the claim that God does exist. Can you see the 4 on the screen? Circumstantial, anthropic principle, logical analysis, rapid formation of granite. Obviously, very few of us know the meaning of those words. We are learning a new language. So bear with me as we go through the heavy stuff. It's heavy, but it'll become much lighter as we go along. So just stay with me. Let's do these 4 today. The circumstantial evidence. What is circumstantial? It means it's not a proof, but it is a pointer. Like an arrow, it points to that direction. The importance of the circumstantial evidence is it does not point to the other side. That's the importance. It points to this side. So here are 3. A, sheer numbers. If a handful of people make an outrageous claim, it's easy to just dismiss it. However, if the claim is supported by millions, then the reasonable response is to accept at least the possibility. And here's a statement by Sam Harris, a very vocal he was a vocal and a strong atheist. And this is what he said: millions of people have had these experiences, meaning religious experiences, and many millions more have had glimmers of them. And we as atheists ignore such phenomena almost in principle. In other words, when there are millions, don't dismiss it. So the sheer numbers is circumstantial evidence. Number 2, the idea of God is very deep in the human psyche. Since the dawn of civilization, every generation has had some idea of God and the supernatural. In other words, we cannot identify a single generation in which the idea of God was completely absent. It has persisted in an unbroken chain in the minds of millions for thousands of years, millennia. Here's what Alison Gopnik, psychology professor at UC Berkeley, said. By elementary school age, children start to invoke an ultimate godlike designer, even children brought up as atheists. And here's a statement by Pew Research Center. Multiple studies across many populations indicate that human beings are hardwired for religious belief. What's the meaning of hardwired? It means that it was not built up during your lifetime. It was already there, embedded. Hardwired means it is a part of your very system. So, that itself gives you some idea of a circumstantial evidence if it's hardwired in us. C, the presence of design. Design is present in the tiniest atom. We said that the nucleus and the distance from the nucleus to the first electron that spins around it is exactly the same in every atom in the entire universe. And the structure of, say, helium and hydrogen and lithium, the small ones, they are the same whether it's on Earth, in the moon, in the sun, in our galaxy, in the other galaxies, everywhere in the universe, it's exactly the same. There is a presence of design. That's in the small parts. What about the big ones? The largest supercluster of galaxies is called Great Boss Wall. BOSS is an acronym, Baryon Oscillation Spectroscopic Survey. You don't have to know the name. Just know that that's a multinational group that's looking out at the universe and figuring out where the galaxies are. And they find that the galaxies are not put there at random. When they look at it, boy, it looks like a magnificent three-dimensional work of art. And I'm quoting from one of them, three-dimensional work of art, not on with your brush on a canvas or pieces of Lego. No, this work of art is using galaxies and clusters of galaxies. So the tiny and a massive design. What about in between? There's the cell. Our bodies, trillions of cells, anywhere from 50 to 100 trillion cells. But take one cell. The activity in one cell could be likened to the complete activity in New York City with all its systems working at maximum capacity. In other words, miniature New York City in an area that is smaller than the dot at the end of the sentence in your book. Miniature, and everything in there, the garbage system, electricity system, the transport system, health system, food system, everything in that little one cell. And it's amazing, but yet it can do what no city can ever hope to accomplish, and that is construct a real, living, fully functional copy of itself in a few hours. Talk about New York City. About 3 hours later, 20 miles away, another New York City, the second. And 6 hours later, New York City, the third. Full with the, Fifth Avenue and Times Square and Empire State Building and its own island of Ellis where you have the Statue of Liberty. Every one of them has the same thing in 3 hours. By the way, they say it happened by itself. Think about that. So here's the options we have. It's magical, amazing. So one side says it's magic performed by a magician, and the other side says it's magic without even the magician. Now you decide which requires more faith to believe. Think about it, my friend. New York City in miniature in 3 hours, another one coming around. What kind of design could that be? You've got to say, wow. Did you say wow? I hope you did. Give credit where credit is due. Number 2 was the Anthropic Principle. What's the meaning of those big words? Anthropos means human. Human, Homo sapien, that's us. The principle, so what's the Anthropic Principle? It's the law-like, amazingly fine-tuned factors spread out all over the universe, which together, mind you, together make life possible on Earth. Hundreds of such factors have been studied. And if any single one of them had not been fine-tuned to its precise value, life would not be possible on this Earth. We're going to look at just three, not 100. There are about 200, by the way. We're going to look at three. But before we look at three, may I ask you to do just one thing? If you are going to say wow to these three, then I want you to sit back and think, how many wows are you going to say if you are going to do 5, 10, 20, 100, 200 of them? So, if you're going to say wow, so let's look at them. The first one we're going to look at is the freezing point of water. Do you know water becomes heavier as the temperature goes down? It becomes denser. But then, let's say from 90 to 80, 70, 50, 30, becoming heavier and heavier. But the trend reverses without any explanation at 4 degrees centigrade. After that, the lower it goes, the lighter it becomes until it comes to the 0 degrees centigrade, when it is the lightest, and at 0 degrees, it freezes to form ice. And that is why ice floats on water, because it's the lightest. How did it become light? Because at 4 degrees, that whole trend changed. There's no scientific explanation for why it should change at 4 degrees centigrade. But if it did not change, ice would form from the bottom of lakes and rivers and oceans, and in just one winter, Earth would be plunged into a giant permanent deep freeze, and liquid water would be too little to sustain life. By the way, what is the history? That the Earth started so many millions of years ago, and then life came on. But then all those years, every winter it's getting colder and colder. So finally, if life had to start, it would have to start in a box of ice. That's amazing, friends. Think about it. And think about the fact that it changes without any scientific explanation at 4 degrees centigrade. Because of that, life is possible. Number two, the mass of the universe. Can you think of people trying to establish what the mass of the universe, the amount of substance in the universe? There are about 1 trillion galaxies, each containing 100 billion stars. And this constitutes only 5%. So the known universe should be about 20 trillion galaxies. Now I'm going to show you something. Can you see this? Here we go. It's a penny. It's about 2.5 grams. At the start of the universe, if that mass of 20 trillion galaxies was more by this much or less by this much, 1 penny, actually a dime, which is less than a penny, a dime is 2.68, this is 2.5. If it were more by this much or less by this much, the universe could not have formed. Why? Because mass is related to the gravity. So with that little bit, this much, I'm going to show it again, this much of mass, if you had taken it away, the gravity would have been too little, and all the stuff would have been flying around, and nothing would have brought them together to form material. If this much was added on, then the gravity would have been too much and the expansion could not have taken place. We would not have a Big Bang. This is the fine tuning, my friends. This much. Amazing. And therefore, the mass and the gravity itself was fine tuned to that extent. Anthropic principle. That's what number two. Number three, sunlight and photosynthesis. You know, photosynthesis is what plants do. They take the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and with the help of the sunlight's rays, they do their stuff to get their own nutrition. And in the process, they give out oxygen so that we who need oxygen can have oxygen. That's photosynthesis, the plant life giving us oxygen. Sunlight produces trillions upon trillions of energy levels of light. What do they produce? Trillions of energy levels. Visible light, what we call violet, indigo, blue, green, yellow, orange, red, that forms just one part of the trillions. So we're going to use just the word trillion, actually trillion upon trillion, but we'll just say trillions. The visible spectrum is only 1 trillionth of the levels of energy that the sunlight gives. Number two, this visible spectrum is the only energy level at which photosynthesis can take place. It's called the photobiological spectrum. The fine, I mean razor thin. And amazingly, 70% of the energy of the sunlight is concentrated into this one razor thin spectrum. Say it again, 70% of the energy of sunlight is concentrated in this one razor thin spectrum. If the energy had been spread out in all the energy levels, we wouldn't have had enough energy on this earth for life to form on this earth. But more than that, planktons, they are tiny plants in the ocean. They live by photosynthesis and they are part of the food chain in the ocean. Those big whales, they eat primarily planktons. I mean, tons of them. And 50% of the oxygen required for life on Earth, on the surface, is from planktons. Where do they live? Approximately 5 to 6 meters below the surface of the water. That's where you find most of the planktons. And here's a point of what we are trying to say when we say, that is fine tuned. Seawater absorbs or blocks the entire spectrum of energy level except for the visible range. It blocks everything except for the visible range, which it allows to go down to the planktons, because that's the only range that allows photobiological activity called photosynthesis. So, what have we said? We've said four things. Visible light is 1 trillionth, actually more than that, less than that, it's 1 trillionth of the whole spectrum of energy levels of sunlight. Number two, photosynthesis takes place only at this energy level. And number three, 70% of the energy of sunlight is concentrated in this narrow, razor thin spectrum. And seawater blocks every other energy level except this and lets it pass through to the planktons below so that we can have life. These four are not connected by any known scientific law. There's nothing that says it should be this way and 70% of the light should be concentrated in this energy and only this energy should be let go past the salt water in the sea, in the ocean. But they must work together, all four, exactly in this way to sustain life on Earth. So I'm going to say that sentence once more with a little difference. They must work together in exactly this way to sustain your life. Yes, all of them must work together to sustain your life. Don't ever take it for granted. The anthropic principle is an amazing thing when we look at how the stuff is all put together. So think about it. What have we said again? Beyond this, the four fundamental forces and all the laws that govern the universe, now think about this, had to be set and fixed at their permanent values, fine tuned to their perfect ratios before the first millionth of a second. Think, you know, the fastest supercomputer in the world, supposed to be the Titan, it belongs to the United States Armed Forces. It works at the rate of 20 petaflops. What's a petaflop? It is 1 trillion floating up, not 1 trillion, 1,000 trillion floating operations per second. So 20 petaflops is 20,000 trillion floating operations per second. This computer would take months to get just the folds of the proteins right in our cells. Just the folds of the protein, because the proteins are, amino acid chains that have to be folded, and only the folded one works like a protein. So it has to be folded in one dimension, and then in another dimension, and then in a third dimension, and also the fourth dimension of time. It changes. So the supercomputer will take months to do that. And this is only in the proteins in the cell. Whereas, look at what is happening in the entire universe. All the fundamental forces, all the laws had to be set in the first millionth of a second. Language fails. Can you see that? Just saying wow was also not enough. One thing we can know, we don't know the extent of this stuff, but we know one thing on the other side, what it is not. One thing we seem to know with dead certainty is this: it could not have happened randomly. If not randomly, then intelligently and with purpose. This is what the anthropic principle teaches. So think critically and rationally for a few seconds and let it sink in. Did you say wow to those three? If you said wow, then can you imagine there's another string of 197 of them still waiting for you to look at? That's the anthropic principle. It's amazing. So that was number two. Number three is the logical analysis. Logic, one form is called syllogism, requires two steps for it to be credible. Step number one, it must have a base statement, or in philosophy they call it the antecedent. That base statement must be above question. In other words, it must be agreed to by both sides. You cannot start a logical discussion with a controversial base statement. No, it has to be something that everyone agrees to. Then, on that base, we place our steps of reasoning. So, let's look at four analyses. Number one, it's called the Kalam Cosmological Argument. It was described by Al-Ghazali, a Muslim, way back in the 12th century. And this is what he said: all changes have causes. Nobody disagrees with that. The clearest changes are starting and stopping. Nobody disagrees with that either. So, whatever starts has a cause. Yes? And then the fact that the universe had a start or a beginning. By the way, we need to state a few words about this question of the universe having a start and a beginning. When we had the French Revolution, they enthroned the goddess of reason. They said, we don't want all this clergy stuff, God and all this nonsense. We are scientists. So throw that all out and we will look at science. But there was a problem, because these guys were saying this universe had a beginning. And if there's a beginning, then by logic, there has to be a beginner. If it was created, there had to be a creator. So they said, no, we will not agree to that. So science at that time started saying that the universe was eternal. If it is eternally there, you don't need a creator. So we can conveniently throw God off. So that was the main idea of science way back 200 years. But then at the turn of the 20th century, Albert Einstein began to do his mind went into so many different ways, and mathematics came in. and it started pointing the other direction, that matter and energy had a starting point. Wow, that was very uncomfortable. In fact, Einstein himself found it uncomfortable. And there were many of them who said, "Ooh," in fact, one of them said it's repugnant thinking that the universe had a beginning at all. But then, three other scientists, Roger Penrose of Oxford, Stephen Hawking, everybody knows, one of the greatest scientists of Cambridge, along with George Ellis from Cape Town, South Africa, got together and they used the same equations and they tried to figure out what happened to space and time. And lo and behold, space and time also had a starting point. So the four things that make up the universe, matter, energy, time, and space, all had a starting point. Do you know when they agreed to that? Or at least started to agree? 1970. Yes, that's when they started. But like I said, it was very uncomfortable. Why should there be a start? Because if there's a start, then there'll be a starter. If it was created, there has to be a creator. So they began to hit at the arguments and say, no, it's not exactly the same. So 1970, 1980, 1990, 2000, 2010. It was only after that that another three scientists, Bourdieu from India, Alexander Vilenkin from Russia, and Alan Guth from the United States, BVG theorem. They put to rest and said there is no escape. Mathematically, astrophysics, science tells us that the universe had a start. There's no way you can get past that. And so now science has agreed. When did they settle that? Do you know? 2017, just 5 years ago. Think, only now we realized. By the way, there was a very ancient document. It was written in Hebrew. The Hebrew document was quite a big document. But the first five words of that document said, "In the beginning, God created." Science took 3,500 years to just catch up. So the universe had a start. Therefore, the universe has a cause, according to the logic that we're just looking at, the Kalam cosmological argument. The universe has a cause. In other words, it didn't start off spontaneously by itself. Logical analysis number 2 is the Pan-Cosmological Argument. It's the same as Pan process, the same source. And here's the argument: no cause or effect causes itself. And this cause is always distinct from its effect or product. So if there's a cause that produced anything, the cause is different from the product and is separate from it. Therefore, the universe, which was the final product, the cause of it has to be separate and distinct from it. Simple? Yes, sometimes it's very simple. Logical analysis number 3, the order principle of science. The order means which comes first. Chronology, which comes first, which comes second. All causes produce effects. Nobody doubts that. All effects have a cause. That's why they call it cause and effect. The cause always precedes the effect. Again, common sense. Therefore, the first cause preceded the product. And if the universe is the product, then the first cause preceded the universe. Once again, pretty simple. Logical analysis number 4. Again, the order principle of science, and this time not which came first or second, but which was bigger. A specific corollary of the order principle is the law that no effect can be quantitatively greater or qualitatively superior to its cause. And this is from Jeremy Walters from the Applied Research Laboratory at Penn State University. So in general, the cause is greater than its effect. Now, it's easier to change the word cause to source. The source of something is always bigger than what that something is, or the product. For example, if you have some money in your wallet or in your purse, and the source of that money was the bank, then you and I can make a reasonable deduction that the bank has a little bit more than what's in your pocket. Reasonable. If you brought home a bag of groceries from the grocery shop, and the grocery shop was the source of your grocery bag, then we can deduce very reasonably that that shop there has a little bit more than your bag of groceries. That's all we are saying. So it's simple. The cause is greater than its effect. How about applying that? Let's apply that now. The world has life, thinking, matter and energy, time and space, and the laws of nature. So we say it has to have cause because it began, so it has to have a cause. So this cause should be able to have an abundance of life because it gave you and me and everyone, all the animals, all the plants, all the insects, a lot of reservoir, a big reservoir of life. How about intellect? You have an intellect, I have an intellect. Man, the reservoir of that intellect must have been huge, a giant intellect. Matter and energy, massive power. We're going to look at that in just a moment now. Time and space, full control because everything is still going on steadily and pretty smoothly. The laws of nature, harmony. We saw that in just a little while ago, harmonizing the laws. So let's look at two of them, intellect and power. Here are the words of Albert Einstein. His feelings take the form of rapturous amazement at the harmony of natural law, which reveals an intelligence of such superiority that compared with it, all the systematic thinking and acting of human beings is an utterly insignificant reflection. And in other places, that infinitely superior spirit, infinitely higher intelligence. That's what he said. Could it point to omniscience? Possibly. How about the second one? Energy, power. I'm going to look back at our penny again. If 1 gram of mass is completely converted into energy, it will give you the power of the atomic bomb that was blasted over Hiroshima. This is 2.5 grams. So if you change this completely into energy, you will have 2.5 of those atomic bombs. That's the amount of energy that you need to make just this. Massive amounts of energy just to form this bitty little penny. How much energy would be required to form the house in which you are sitting? How about your city? How about the globe? How about the solar system? How about the galaxy in which we are? How about 1 trillion galaxies, which is just 5%? So they have 20 trillion galaxies. Can you think of the energy that was required to form this kind of mass? The enormous amount of energy required to produce such a stupendous quantity of mass is just mind bending and would easily go beyond all human computation. The clear logical conclusion would be to acknowledge that that source or that cause may reasonably be described as infinite, omni, all potent power, all powerful, almighty. How about the words of the father of logic? Aristotle, the father of modern day logic, when he looked at it logically, he said, if there's a cause of this world, he would have to have certain features. And here are two of the features that I put on the screen highlighted. It had to be omnipotent and omniscient by logic. Because if you look at what is there, this is what you will come to, omnipotence and omniscience. So, what is the conclusion of our logical analysis? The universe has a cause. The cause is separate from the universe. It preceded the universe and is possibly omnipotent and omniscient. Then, reasonably, my friends, we could call this cause God. And this conclusion was reached by evidence and logic alone without a single reference to any religious founder, religious book, or religious writing. You know what Socrates said? Go where the argument leads, go where the evidence leads. He was quoting Plato, by the way. Think critically, think rationally for a minute or so. I hope you're thinking. Let's get on. Number 4 of the third column, arguments for theism. Well, theism includes the theory of creation, in which certain events happened rapidly, like in one day. Atheism is the exact polar opposite. All major events happen very gradually over millions of years. Now, one day and millions of years is very far apart, my friends. The claim is that no major formation ever happened rapidly. What we're going to do now is to look at the specific example of the formation of granite. Granite is found all over the world. And, it forms kind of the crust of the earth. Atheism says it took millions of years to form. Theism says it happened rapidly. Now, if this is true, it would point definitely to a supernatural action, probably God. Here's what scientific evidence shows: granite formed in 3 minutes to 5 hours. Wow. So, wow. So, when you say wow, the first question is, wow, is that true? So, let's have a look at it. Radioactive substances, they give off radiation. And when they give off radiation, they give off of themselves. So, when it's giving off itself, its own mass will come down slowly. And when it gives off radiation, it gives off it's kind of like a point of fire. So it'll cause a burn in the substance around it when it's giving off radiation. Polonium 218 is a radioactive substance that does give off radiation. And a word half-life, you will hear it in science. Half-life is how much time it takes to get to half its mass. For example, if you start off with 20 grams of the mass, if it takes 1 year for it to become 10 grams, then from 10 to 5 is also takes just exactly 1 year. And from 5 to 2.5, again 1 year. And from 2.5 to 1.5 grams, again just 1 year. In other words, the half-life of an element that is a radioactive element is always the same. The half-life of polonium 218 is 3 minutes, full life about 5 hours. And it gives off its radiation in burns that are concentric circles. It's called halos, described as halos. In fact, they're so characteristic that if you see a halo there, you will know it was polonium that formed it. Here's what we are putting it together now. If we find polonium halos in any substance, because it takes only 3 minutes to vanish away, 3 minutes to 5 hours to just vanish away, then that substance had to form in 3 minutes to 5 hours. Got it? We'll say it again. It lasts only 3 minutes to 5 hours. And it causes burns like halos. So if we find halos in a substance, then that substance formed in 3 minutes to 5 hours. Studies from the famous Oak Ridge lab in Knoxville, Tennessee. By the way, the lead scientist, his name is Robert Gentry. That's at the bottom of the screen there. I met him personally and discussed some of this stuff. And he told me, I'd met some years ago, that nobody had actually controverted his study. What did it show? All pieces of granite have thousands of halos embedded throughout the substance. The scientific inference is astonishing, my friends. More than that, 2 things. Number 1, nobody has yet formed granite in the science lab. Nobody. We know what it's made up of, the composition. We also know the temperature and pressure which might have formed granite, but when we do it, it never forms granite. It forms only a crumbly substance, not the stuff that we talk about when we say granite. So nobody knows how granite forms. Number 2, granite has never contained an original fossil. Never. Fossils are found only in sedimentary rock, not in granite. By the way, fossilization takes time. So what we are saying is granite was formed in less than 5 hours. Time. Consider also another fact. We saw it a few minutes ago and even the last time. All forces of nature and laws of the universe were set in the first millionth of a second. Look at the rapidity of mental thought in a millionth of a second. Every law in the universe was set. And this huge structure called granite, like the Rock of Gibraltar. And if you've ever gone to Yosemite National Park, the El Capitan, that's also granite, huge thing formed in 5 hours. Does this rapidity then show theism or atheism? Think about it, my friends. So, this is what we've done today. Column number 3, arguments for theism: circumstantial, anthropic principle, logical analysis, and rapid granite formation. Every argument stands logical, philosophical, and scientific scrutiny. Go where the argument leads, said Socrates. What grade would you give this column? Do you know the first column got 0 because there were no arguments? The second column also got 0 because there were 6 arguments, but none of them stood. They were all breaking down. Out of 10, what grade would you give this column? Think and give your own grade, because at the end we're going to look at those grades that we gave. Give your own grade. Don't worry about what somebody else gives. But look at all the 4: the circumstantial evidence, the anthropic principles, of which we saw only 3, and there are another 197 standing in line waiting for you to look at. Logical analysis, 4 of them. And rapidity, we saw rapid action, which nobody can deny. Are you with me? Q&A session now.
I'm sorry, I had it on mute because I didn't want to disturb anyone. But I'm looking at the comments and I'm seeing wows and God is powerful and just the. You said this was going to be. I felt that it's going to be a mind blowing one tonight, and that's exactly what took place tonight. It was mind blowing, and as we're talking about thinking about creation, of course, I got my little one here, and thinking about the fact that when you talk about the penny and the energy that it takes, 2.5 grams
Yeah.
is equivalent to 2.5 atomic bombs. And when we look at a child, a baby, with the the reproduction and the recreation of life, there is no way that you can say that there is not a God. That is not something that just happens at all. The next thing that I'm seeing, and please, for those of you who have questions, please place your questions in the comments. We would love to. This is your opportunity to have Dr. Pandit answer your questions, and we'll bring them up.
There's
And
one question up there. If you can put it down, the one on top.
okay, where?
No, there was something about Einstein.
Oh yeah, I did see that. Okay, I
I don't see it on my
yes,
screen.
there's so many. Here it is.
Yeah.
Okay, here it is. Amazing how a face for atheism, Einstein is a God believer.
That's a very good question. In fact, there's a there's a little controversy on that. But if you look at what he himself said, there's no question that he believed that there was something beyond the natural. In other words, there was something metaphysical, and he could not put his finger on it except to say that there is reason. These are his words: reason incarnate. In other words, there is reason within nature. And if you look at the word reason, the reason cannot come about without a mind. And therefore, he also believed that there was a mind, and he called it an intelligence that was infinitely superior to the human race. So, in that sense, you could not call him an atheist. In fact, the words he used said, "I am not an atheist." In other words, he believed there had to be a God from the sheer evidence that he found within the science that he looked at. To use the word reason incarnate, and every scientist, my friends, who have looked there, they stand amazed at what they call the elegance. Now, if there's any astrophysicist or a physicist, if you ever say your words are elegant, that was the highest praise you can give him. The word elegance. And when they look at the universe, they say, man, there is elegance here. Elegance in not just in what they see, but in the mathematics and in what they call the symmetry, just elegant symmetry. That's why so many of them do believe. And now it is changing. By the way, some of the comments or the quotes that I had are
Mhm.
from 2021. The whole the whole idea is now shifting back. And I have a book written by, oh, here it is. It is written by Stephen Meyer, The Return of the God Hypothesis.
Mm.
The last 20 years, science is coming back after having run away during the scientific revolution and the French Revolution, moving completely away from God. It is now swinging back, and I think some of us should be in line with that swing so that we can take it in our grasp and, and blast it to the whole world that this is the truth of the matter.
Awesome.
Any other
Oh,
questions?
absolutely, there is. Okay, here's the next question. This question is from Gigi Jones. What is the difference between an atheist and an agnostic?
Good question. The word A is in both. The theist, the atheist is A without theos, God. So an atheist says God is not there. He is not in existence. I don't believe that he's in existence. Agnostic, again, A without gnosis is knowledge. In other words, an agnostic says, I don't have enough information to form a decision, so I'm standing in the middle. But what happens when you are a natural agnostic? You will swing to the side of atheism. So, an agnostic actually, that's a really good question. An agnostic is the one who's actually in between.
Mm.
In other words, he does not know which side to go to. By the way, if you and I are rational, neutral inquirers, then we will have to acknowledge what is called Kurt Gödel's theorem. He called it the incompleteness theorem. And he showed mathematically that you cannot make a firm theory. In other words, you cannot state the truth of the matter until you know every pertinent detail and information that applies to that matter. So, there is not a single person on earth who can say that he knows everything about the matter, and therefore, everyone on earth is actually an agnostic.
Mm.
So, who is a
Interesting.
believer and who is a non believer then, if everyone is an agnostic? So, here's how we differentiate. A believer is an agnostic who has chosen to believe God exists, and an atheist is an agnostic who has chosen to believe that God does not exist.
Mm.
Both are agnostics. What we are looking at is asking, where is the weight of evidence?
Mm.
Which is the weight of evidence? That's what we're trying to do with the pan process. Good question. There's a difference. There are agnostic believers and there are agnostic disbelievers. They make their choices. You have to make a choice. And because atheism and theism are mutually exclusive, you cannot bring them together. You have to make a choice of one side or the other. By the way, the agnostic does not and cannot live as an agnostic. Did you know that? No, you can only live as if God exists or as if God does not exist. Because between existence and non existence, there's nothing. A thing is either in existence or it is totally non-existent. There's nothing in between existence and non-existence. So an agnostic has to live as if God exists or has to live as if God does not exist. There's no such thing as agnostic practical life. That is why we say that if you're an agnostic, that's fine, but you've got to choose. which side you want to lean on. And that's what we are trying to show, that the reasonable side to lean on is that side that has the greatest evidence, the weight of evidence, like we do in a court of law. That's all we are trying to do. And I hope you can see that we've done 3 columns, one more to go. And when we finish that, then we will sit back and we'll look at the weight of evidence.
Awesome.
Good question.
Awesome. We have a couple more questions here. This one is from Gregory Hall. He found that quantum physics, how do you feel about the frequencies that came from the science?
Quantum physics, I'm not sure, sir, what you mean by the frequencies that come from this science. Quantum physics talks about the basics of quantum physics is that you word quanta means it is fixed. I'll give you an example. We said that the electron that spins around the nucleus spins at a certain distance. That distance is at an energy level and it is fixed. The next energy level is where the next electron spins around. No electron ever spins around in between those energy levels. Therefore, it's called quanta, amount. It can jump from here to there, but nothing in between. That's the basic of quantum physics. In other words, you can look at particulate matter, they call elementary particles, and how they behave, because they behave in quantum jumps. And so to look at those principles is what is called quantum physics. So I'm not exactly sure what you mean by frequencies that came from this science. If you can clarify that, I don't mind responding. What do you mean by frequencies that came from this science? Are you talking about, for example, are you talking about the string theory or the superstring theory that that vibrate in certain frequencies? Is that on your mind?
Well, he actually, I'm going to post it because he did respond to that, and I'm going to go back to two more questions that I want to make
Okay.
sure we get answered. Um, so he says, I use quantum physics to see what's going on in the body every day using vibration.
Then you are talking about the theory of probably string theory or superstring theory. The word vibration is not accepted in all of quantum physics. So if you're doing only vibration, you're doing only that part, and that is a theory, and it's theorized. But remember, those little things that that vibrate are only theoretical. We do not know whether they exist at all. So superstring theory, string theory are only theories. We've never seen those strings, and probably they are so small that we'll never see them at all. So just using the word vibration, you can study it in theoretical physics, but you cannot settle it as a scientific theory.
Okay. All right. So don't want to be remiss in putting in the last part of his comment, which is the next one is where he says your body gives off frequencies, and I guess they can be read.
Oh, that is not quantum physics. That is Eastern mysticism. And we do. And that's again a theory. Nobody has ever documented any frequencies that our body gives off. We do give off all kinds of influences. Yes, sir. In fact, when a person walks into a room, people know that he is there even without seeing him. In other words, there is some interaction going on. And if you mean frequencies by that influence somehow that is there, yes, it is there. Our body does give off some kind of an influence to the area around us and maybe to an even distant area. But that is pure theory. That has nothing to do with what we see as actual occurrences. Frequencies giving off, if we say they are, then they should be able to be quantified. They should be able to be brought into a place where we can study them. We are unable to do that. So it's a theory, and probably it is true, but you can't say we read it and it is something that is a part of our existence that has a scientific explanation.
Awesome. We're going to take two more questions and we're going to post this for everyone to see as well. All right. So this is from David Haynes. This might be premature or addressed in a later discussion. But what about ancient Sumerian text versus the Bible? How how the how to reason with someone who thinks older text means it's more truth?
We will be studying it much later, but it's a good question right now. You're talking about earlier text. The question of dating and the question of the truthfulness are actually two different things, unless we say this one came from this. And if you address them as one having emerged from the other, then we go back to see which one was earlier. Yeah, then we say, okay, let's figure out which one was earlier. If there's a question, in other words, if there's a question as to the truthfulness of the matter, dependent on the age, then we go to study which one is earlier. We can't do them if they're completely separate. In other words, you can't go to the Quran and say, let's figure out the Quran, which came earlier or later than the Bhagavad Gita of the Hindus. No, they are two different systems altogether. So when you look at writings that are metaphysical, the Quran, the Sumerian text, the Mayan texts, the Bhagavad Gita, the Quran, the Torah, these have to be looked at as separate texts in which you look for the authenticity in a different way than just merely looking at which came first or which came second. Unless, like I said, we know that one came from the other, but we do not know anything about that part when it comes to all these texts. So, yes, the Sumerian and the Mayan texts are the early texts, but remember, the Chinese and the Indian texts are very, very early too. The Sumerian ones, we date them, but we don't know when they were actually written. So dates are very difficult to come by. But we can say this: when you want to look at the authenticity of a piece of literature, the date cannot be a major factor unless we say one came from the other.
All right. And we have one more question. And this is from it says, Dr. Pandit. Here we go. On the half life topic, how can the half life remain the same time span for half the amount of each year? Or did I understand you wrong or understand it wrong?
The word half life refers to a very specific feature of a radioactive substance. So I'll say it again. If the radioactive substance started at 20 grams, it gives off radiation, but what is the radiation? Its own mass in the form of radiation. So its own mass is coming down. The rate at which it comes down is the same when it halves the amount. For example, if from 20 to 10 it takes 1 year, it will take the same 1 year to go from 10 to 5. It's like becoming half. It takes the same 1 year to go from 5 to 2.5 grams, and it takes the same 1 year to go from 2.5 to 1.25. It's called the half life. In radioactive substances, becoming half in any element is exactly the same, whether you start at 100 or whether you start at 5 or 6. It will make it into half, it is the exact same period of time.
Well, we have had a very powerful show tonight. I mean, episode, I wouldn't call it a show. This session was absolutely just solidifying with many of us and deepening our faith in the God who made us and created us. So, Dr. Pandit, thank you so much for hosting us again on this Thursday. And everyone, please, if you have any other questions based off this session or the previous sessions, and if you haven't seen the previous two, please go back. They are saved on the YouTube channels. Um, Please just email me at Patrice, P-A-T at livingmanna.live, and I will share every question with Dr. Pandit for you, and he will definitely answer your questions. So, on behalf of Living Manna Church, Pastor Myers, Asante Myers, and on Dr. Pandit, I'm Patrice, who your host tonight. We thank you, and we will see you, God willing, next Thursday at 8 p.m. for another session of science, philosophy, and metaphysics. Have a great night.